Recording in progress. All right. Welcome to another edition of the AmeriCorps Alum Network podcast. I'm Nikki Fiacco, and I'm here with Brittany McGarry, who is a VISTA alum from 2009, 2010. And we're going to dive into her story and her journey and what she's doing now, and how AmeriCorps apparently got her into something that was very big in her life. And she'll go over that in a little bit. But for those of you who are tuning in for the first time, Nikki Fiacco, and I'm the brainchild of this podcast and decided to bring us alumni together. There's more than 1 million strong that have served throughout our country. I know. And I think I've got to double check this, but I believe that like an AmeriCorps alum went to the moon. So I just need to figure out who that is and get them on here because I feel like I'll get more views.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And I also have to fact check that. But so anyways, there's more than 1 million of us that have served throughout the country, and also in the territories, Guam, Puerto Rico, Alaska, Hawaii. So I just think it's a great opportunity for us to all come together as alumni and talk about our experiences, see where we are across the country, what types of resources we can share with each other, and skills and job opportunities and professional development. Quick backstory about me. I am an AmeriCorps alum, obviously. And I was 2011, 2012, and I was state national serving in a regional park in Anne Arundel County, Maryland, focusing on environmental education. And then that took me to be hired by my site. I worked for the governor of Maryland, the Hogan administration, in a couple different roles. And then I was eventually the executive director of his state service commission, which monitors like grantees across the state who have state and national AmeriCorps members. And then I did a little bit of time down in South Carolina with their state service commission as well. But I've come full circle to talk to you alums. And really, this podcast is not about Nikki Fiacco. It is about AmeriCorps alums and your experiences. So I'm going to pass it over to Brittany to introduce yourself and reflect on, bring us all up to speed. How did you find AmeriCorps? How did it find you? And we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Nikki. I'm very excited. The first podcast I listened to, really cool. This is just a cool movement, and I'm happy to be a part of it. So thank you for spearing this. I don't know what is adventure, spearing the adventure.
Yeah,
that we have, because it's an adventure. So my name is Brittany McGarry. I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky, and now I live in Denver, Colorado. My AmeriCorps program was at the University of Southern Maine in Portland, Maine, like right in the city there. And I was, like Nikki said, I was a VISTA. And my job itself was, I was a student government advisor, but I also was tasked with creating a culture of service on campus. And how people defined that at the University of Southern Maine is primary. I don't want to say it's not that it wasn't a traditional college, but very much people that came from all walks of life. And so people that, are married and have kids and already have careers, but they're like coming back to school and elevating themselves in that way. But there was also like your traditional college age students as well. So it was a good mix of people and how they defined service. And so my first task was like, well, what does community engagement mean to you? Kind of learning from the student body, in addition to trying to, so like the big thing that happened there in the first year, in the year that I was there, was really creating their day of service. And so, I partnered with nonprofits in the community and, helped build that capacity of, because there's a lot of opinions nowadays about like a day of service and how impactful it actually is. And I do think it's an entry point for students. Because that could be their first time ever engaging in a nonprofit, whether, maybe they didn't have that experience growing up. Maybe their families were too busy to like, find time for them to volunteer. And so sometimes it was their very first experience. And some people like changed their entire career path. Some people were like, this is just going to be something I do on a weekly basis. Some people, it truly was like a one and done. And they were like, this was fun. I am looking forward to doing it again next year. And then after, I truly to this day believe, because my undergrad, I have a bachelor's in communication, whatever that means nowadays. And it was a focus in journalism. And when I graduated, I really wanted to go into like student affairs administration, and which is essentially like what I was doing in AmeriCorps, like student government, community service initiatives. But when I graduated, like, I mean, I had a good time in college, so my GPA wasn't great. I did not have a 3.0 GPA when I graduated. It was like
the honesty.
No, I'm like, whatever. I didn't care. Like no one. But to get into graduate school, there were requirements. I was also a terrible standardized test taker. So the GRE, I swear, I think I took it like 4 times, and I think I got like either the same score or the worst score. I don't know, like it just wasn't my strong suit. And so I had like a 2.8 GPA, horrible standardized test score. And I remember my graduate program, I eventually did get in, but I had my master's from Appalachian State University in North Carolina. And I remember interviewing, because like they have their qualifications, but it also says like, we still encourage you to apply if you do not meet these. And well, that was every university I applied for. I was like, well, I don't have a 3.0, but I don't care. I'm still applying. So I will never forget my interview with the man who turned out to be my advisor. I said, look, I have the experience to do this work. I have the passion to do this work. And if you don't accept me this year, you're going to see me until you do. And he kind of like, I think I shocked him a little bit, but he also giggled and he was like, all right, that's good to know. And I ended up getting an assistantship in the community service office. And I truly also believe that was because of my AmeriCorps experience. And so it just kind of was this domino effect. People are always like, oh, the timing and everything happens for a reason. And I think I didn't get into grad school, which is how I kind of ended up in AmeriCorps. Because I didn't want to do the Peace Corps because I was like, like, I don't want to do something for 2 years. That feels too long. Like, I really want to, like, I only want to take like a certain time off. And I did end up taking 2 years, because then I only did 1 year of AmeriCorps and then took another year off to just focus on applications. But initially I was like, I don't want to take 2 years off in between undergrad and grad, because I was like, my studious practice is going to go away, but I also knew I needed some space as well. And AmeriCorps gave that to me, and then gave me the opportunity to do what I actually wanted to do as well.
I was just talking to a colleague today about, because recruitment has been down across the board for AmeriCorps. And, I need to do some research to figure out what exactly it is. There's thoughts that, when there's a good economy, then AmeriCorps service recruitment is down. But, I just think it's just a different time. But I did mention that for students who are going through university or afterwards, a year of service gives them the theory that they learn in school, and then the actual experience of going through and building a community, building a community engagement for students, and building days of service. And then when they go into either job interviews or graduate programs, they're able to speak to the experience that they have, or that they had during their service year. So, and for all things, because, I mention this every time on the podcast, is that like, I was 30 something when I did my service year, but I was able to lift up the things that I did during my service year to carry me along. And I had more things to talk about, right? Like, sure, I had a daycare and I raised kids and I was a substitute teacher and I could figure anything out. But at this point, I didn't have anything like super tangible that I could speak to. Program development, project development, implementation. Like, I didn't even know that was a word, I don't think, until after my service year.
And there's so much to be said about that, right? Because it is only a year, but the amount of impact that you have in a year, because AmeriCorps program is set up, because it's government funded, right? So like the data that you have to compile and prove, to make sure that you're checking all of the boxes, that in itself was empowering to me, because I was like, at the end of your year, you get all of those reports back and they send like, here's your impact statement. And I'm like, oh my God. Like, I just remember being so shocked at myself, because I reported all of that stuff, but
yeah,
together in one like big package, I was like, wow. So even though it might've been annoying at the time to like fill out those weekly reports, it was really, really empowering to see the impact at the end of the year, for sure.
yeah. And that speaks to so many things. I have a son who's in his early 20s right now, and I was just having a conversation with him, and he's like, I just don't feel like I'm doing anything. I don't feel like I've done anything over the back. And it's funny, I should have like been like, well, let's track your data. Like, what have you been doing? How many, so for those people who are watching that, I have all the streams of service up here and Vista's over there. Could you speak to what Vista is, if you remember, and like what the program is and how it's different from the other ones?
So and this also could have changed, like it's been a decade, since, but I remember like the Vista, and Volunteers in Service to America is like,
yes.
Oh, good. I remember that right. Yay.
Yes.
That's the acronym. But I also remember like Vista being like, the programs that a Vista has is different than a program that like NCCC or like State National has. And Vista, like this particular Vista program, was also directly connected to Campus Compact, which is another, like, you're nodding. I love Campus Compact. Like one of these days, maybe I'll work
for them.
Oh, I just adore everything about what they do. And again, that was an entry point into like my higher ed experience, was with Campus Compact, and they do such amazing stuff. But I think from my perspective, like I was attracted to the Vista situation because, one, I was moving away from home for the first time. Like I'm from Louisville. I went to school in Louisville. So I wanted to like have my own space. So like I rented an apartment and things like that. And like some NCCC, I think, is very like community-based living. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. They travel around together as a team.
Yeah. So I also wanted to be like in one spot. I wanted it to be like very like program specific, which I think is more of a Vista thing than like that project management tools that like State National and NCCC does. Like NCCC is very like hands-on, active, because they do move around a lot. And I also had like some physical limitations, and I knew like this, I was kind of doing the process of elimination of like, this isn't going to work. But Vista was like the right program fit for me because of all of those things.
Yeah. And it's my understanding that Vista focuses on alleviating poverty, and focuses on alleviating poverty and homelessness and hunger. So yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's very cool. And there's actually some different perks that you get as an AmeriCorps Vista with the education award. Because like State and National, I got the education award, but I could only use it for institutions. Is it my understanding that Vista, you can actually cash it out?
You could. And so the difference was pretty significant. Like it was like we're talking like the cash award was like, I'm making this up because I literally I do not remember, but it was like maybe $1,500 or something.
Yeah.
But the education award was like significantly more than that. I would say like maybe 5,000 or 6,000.
Yeah.
And I remember that's how I paid off. Like I took out some student loans when I was in undergrad to like pay for a summer class because I couldn't pass statistics during the year. Enter my GPA being a disaster. But I also like lived on campus for a semester just to experience it because I was a commuter student. And that my AmeriCorps education award paid for that loan. So, I don't know, like maybe if I hadn't have I could have also paid, like used that to pay for part of graduate school, but I was like, I still got this loan over here I want to get rid of. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. It provides so many different options. I know when I was a director of an AmeriCorps program, Volunteer Maryland, we had AmeriCorps alums that used it so creatively. One woman went to Alaska and kayaked and did like it was an outward bound program. And then I don't, this was not a lucid dream. I think it was real, but I think somebody went to culinary school in Italy and it paid for that as well. So it can be, people can use it in all different ways. I used it as a drop in the bucket for my student loans, which for those of you who don't know about public loan forgiveness, is that called, what is it called? Public.
I think that's right.
Yeah, public loan forgiveness. Because I've been working in nonprofits ever since my AmeriCorps year, so, or government and nonprofits. So anyways, that's the nuts and bolts. So the folks out there who might be thinking about serving, because I don't know how to make this just a closed group. This is out to the public. So people are like, Amera, what? What is this nonsense?
We will educate you on all the
Yes.
things.
Yes. So after your service year, you got into grad school because of AmeriCorps, or at least that's your perspective. And like, what next? How did you land where you are now? Because I think what you're doing now is pretty significant and very, very cool.
Thank you. So I went to grad school, got my master's in college student development. When I graduated from App State, North Carolina, I moved to Denver, and I was working, it's funny, you mentioned the culinary thing. I was working at a culinary school in their student engagement office. And so I was an assistant director of student activities. And again, that university was like, we want to build a community service program. And I was like, great, done. I did that in AmeriCorps.
Yeah.
Again,
Let me get my big binder down.
I mean, honestly, it was literally like copy and paste, I don't know if AmeriCorps was why I got the job here or not. I couldn't tell you, but I can almost guarantee that it was a very big help based on it just being an additional experience. So I built the program here. Same thing. We did like an MLK day of service. We called it MLK Challenge. So I copied that program from my grad program and brought it here. We did an April community day of service, same concept. And then I actually also launched like an alternative service program as well, which is kind of funny because we did it with Habitat for Humanity's Collegiate Challenge, which is run by AmeriCorps people. So I mean, there was a lot of crossover happening. And I was it just, full circles were happening all over the place.
Yeah.
And I grew up volunteering, right? I grew up volunteering. Whether it was with school or my family on the weekends, that kind of thing. And then even in college, I was very involved in Relay for Life with the American Cancer Society. And that I met, my orientation leader was a cancer survivor, and he changed my whole outlook on life. And, we're still friends to this day. And then, gosh, I think after I started volunteering out here in Denver as a Relay for Life volunteer in a community-led event. And then I started working for the American Cancer Society. And then, I figured out okay, I really love the community engagement part, but I'm not I hated fundraising. I hated the logistical stuff. I was like, I don't care about tents, tables, and chairs and porta potties, or permitting. That was not my strong suit. I liked the relationship management part of working with volunteers. American Cancer Society's relay model is very volunteer driven, staff supported. And which is it's fine. It's a good model. But I think, things are changing in the world. And so after I left that job, because I was like, I can't do all three of these things really well. I want to just focus on the volunteer piece of it. And I'll be honest, I did not think that existed. I truly was like, if you work for a nonprofit, you're going to fundraise.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was the thing, because in all of my volunteer experience, all of it's been like very directly related to to fundraising. And so I just didn't realize that there was a space just for volunteer engagement. And so now I work at the National MS Society, and that is my work, is volunteer engagement. And so it's very, very specific to exactly what it sounds like engaging volunteers in our mission, and whether or not that, most of the time, it's not like money impacting. Like if a volunteer wants to donate, they're welcome to. If they want to fundraise, they're welcome to. But that's not our job as volunteer engagement professionals. We can connect those dots, but our role is really like, how do you want to move our movement forward, right, in the world of MS? Because this just came out yesterday, the peer-to-peer forum, which is like the fundraising kind of arm that does all this research. In 2022, so we know that there are 1 million people living with MS. If you think about that, like that's not a ton, right? And that's just what we know. And that statistic came out a couple of years ago, and people were like, wow, because before that we didn't know there was that many. But when you
MS, multiple sclerosis, right?
Multiple sclerosis, yes. So when you think about that number, you think about the people that are impacted by cancer or diabetes or heart disease, or I don't know, I could go on and on. That 1 million is like pretty small, right? Our Walk MS and Bike MS signature series events are in the top 10 of that peer-to-peer forum, which is for like fundraising, right? Okay. Which is pretty cool. And in addition to that, we engage like probably about 50,000 volunteers a year. Wow. And that's pretty all-inclusive of everything that we do. Again, though, that 50,000 people, like that's not a ton, but the amount of work that we accomplish with, I don't know, it's all relative, right? Of like how big an organization is and how many people really, because like professional, like staff wise, we probably have about 800 employees. Don't quote me on that, but like
that's nationwide.
That's nationwide. And so the impact that we're having as what I consider as a pretty small national organization with the volunteer pool that is making the impact in the communities that we maybe don't have a necessarily like footprint in is pretty impactful and like big. Yeah. It brings me back to my AmeriCorps days. Yeah, it's the multiplier effect, right? Like when we were at when I was serving at Volunteer Maryland, it was great. I served there, and then like I think it was like 8 years later, I was director of the program. So I went right to my HR files, and I'm like, oh, I was a terrible AmeriCorps member. That's not true, AmeriCorps. I was a great AmeriCorps member. You're like, false information.
Yeah, false information. But that's one of the models that they taught us was the multiplier effect, right? Like one AmeriCorps member builds out a volunteer program, and then that volunteer program just multiplies upon itself. And it's that catalyst that volunteers provide. And when we chatted a couple weeks ago, you had mentioned that the volunteer program is actually housed in the HR department, and we were both like, how important that is. You want to speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I think so. And that's not, I don't necessarily, anytime I say that to someone, they're like, oh, what? And then it's like, ding, it makes total sense, because at the end of the day, people that manage volunteers, they're people managers. What do you think HR does? They're human resources, and it helps with our risk management too. So like if you need to, like this doesn't happen often, but it does happen. If you need to fire a volunteer, we have the support of our human resources department on how to have difficult conversations. If you like, there's a lot of risk associated with volunteering, right? And so like if someone gets hurt, they have an entire, like they're backed and covered by our insurance, first of all, because, they're volunteer and they sign that consent form. But they're backed by our HR department, and they're backed by like our community. It just helps keep us, I kind of want to say humble in a way of like, to treat them a little bit higher level of like, you know, because there's this vibe in the universe, and you hear volunteers say this a lot. Well, I'm just a volunteer.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, there is no just about being a volunteer. You
Yeah.
are a volunteer, and you make our events possible. You make the work that we do better and more engaging and powerful. Like, so there's that perspective too of like, when you are covered by our insurance, we're treating you. I mean, like everyone does that. Like most nonprofits are like, yeah, if a volunteer gets hurt on the job, like, or while they're volunteering, like, yes, you're covered on it, you know? So it's just, it gives us that confidence to like level up on our volunteer experience.
Well, I think as a volunteer coordinator, then you're not being bogged down with the policies and procedures because they're already in place and somebody else is already doing them. And you're like, this is just the policies and procedures, but you're more focused on getting the people where they need to be and engaged and all of that stuff. So I just think that is important for some people that are watching this that might be part of nonprofits and they might be doing new strategic plan or something, you know, considering moving the volunteer coordination under HR and not making the volunteer coordinator HR. Like, let's not do that, right?
Right. And like, I mean, and we call ourselves in the event world at the National MS Society, the three-legged stool, because there's, you know, that volunteer engagement person recruiting volunteers for events. There's also the event production team who's doing that permitting, porta potties, tables, chairs, that kind of stuff that I was like, this is not my forte. Then there's a third leg of that stool that is doing that fundraising and development piece. It doesn't mean that there isn't crossover with that, right? That your top fundraisers family may not want to ride at a bike event, but they're going to run a rest stop as a volunteer group. You know what I mean? And so there's, I don't know, we weren't always organized like that either. Like that's pretty, I say new, I'd say within the last like 6 or 7 years how we've been organized that way. But it truly is a full-time job to recruit, train, and execute volunteer engagement. It really is. And so in these, you know, it doesn't matter how big your nonprofit is either. If you are a small, tiny nonprofit in one community, you still need a volunteer coordinator. You do, you just do. And that is their only job. They're not in charge of marketing. They're not in charge of logistics. They're truly in charge of volunteer coordination so that they can focus on building that and making it the best program it can be in whatever that looks like for your organization. But it really should be its own entity.
And that also speaks to retention, because if you're paying attention to the volunteers and you're giving them the attention that they need and the support that they need, then they're going to want to stick around. I mean, I've done volunteer coordination for over a decade, and I've seen events where the AmeriCorps members, the volunteers are standing around, and I've been to those events where I'm like, what are we doing? And I'm like, this is a huge waste of my time. Like, I don't want to be here. So whenever I was doing volunteer coordination, I always ensured that, like, if somebody didn't have something to do, I'd find something for them to do, and make sure that everything was. And I remember I did this one thing. I did a race. It was for Rec Deeds, Good Deeds for Rec Deeds. I can't remember the organization, but anyways, I had a bunch of students, like high school students, and I was trying to build my Instagram page at the time. And so I told them where to go on the course. And I said, as soon as you get there, make sure you have like where you're supposed to be, and then take a picture of yourself. And so once they started doing that, I wanted to make sure they were in the right spot. And then I used those pictures on Instagram to be like, hey, John from Severna Park High School is here volunteering, and to try to get people to start following the Instagram. So, I couldn't do that if I had to figure out like where the finish line was, or do we have all the drinks? I was really focused on the people. So, you had mentioned that you have some events coming up soon. Just kind of thinking about like where, I don't know what you're up to right now, and if there's anything that like people might be interested in getting involved with.
Yeah, I think, I mean, like I said, we are a nationwide organization, and our website is, nationalmssociety.org. There is, what I value the most about this organization is we very much find the right fit for our volunteers and plug them in where it makes sense for them, right? Like it doesn't have to be events. Maybe you hate events and that's not your jam. Fine, we have other things that you can engage in. That is primary like entry point for volunteers, is like volunteering at an event for a few hours. But then there's like that, just like in a career, there's a volunteer journey that you go through. Like you come to an event. I said this to a staff member yesterday that we were talking about like volunteer committees. And I was like, our events, even if you show up alone, most people don't volunteer alone, but if you do show up alone, you're not leaving alone, because you have made a connection, whether it's with another volunteer, with a staff member, with a participant. Like, you have made a connection, and you'll either take that connection and go have coffee. I've literally had events that like multiple people like show up and they're in the same spot, but they didn't know each other before. And they'll leave and like go to lunch together. Like, it's hilarious. I don't know what it is. There is a vibe at our events that really create that community feeling. And I think, that truly has something to do with, like, there's 1 million people in the country that we know of that are living with MS. Like, that's a lot, but at the same time, it's not a lot. And so that our MS community is like small but mighty and incredibly impactful. So events are definitely a way to engage, but we also have, board members. Like, if someone's like, I really want to come in with an elevated experience, and I have a ton of experience and I have a really strong connection to MS, board members are always something that we look for. There's also like committees, like I said, that we're looking with. We just launched a new program. It's called our MS Ambassador Program. And essentially it's kind of a choose your own adventure. So if you live somewhere and you're like, no one in my community knows anything about MS, and we don't even have a neurologist that specializes in MS, you're that person that can help us tell your community and educate your community on the movement. Not to say that it's like the sole responsibility of a volunteer, but it helps us get the word out,
right,
and educate people about the disease, because it's also just not like, it's not, it impacts and affects everyone very, very differently. Some people, it's like very disabling and like they can never walk again. Other people, they do infusions like 2 times a year and they live what they consider a normal life. It truly is like it's very unique in that way, unfortunately. Like,
well, those are great opportunities for people to think about supporting. And I'll drop the website into the description when I edit this beautiful video. So circling back around to AmeriCorps, just to kind of reflect back on that and just wrap things up with the last few questions. I should have prepped you for this, so you had a real good story ready. But did anything happen during your service year that was just like extraordinarily wild, or like, oh my gosh, I can't even believe, or I didn't even know how I was going to get out of this situation, or something along those lines that is not against the prohibited activities?
right? I think, that whole year, and I probably could sit here and tell you 10 stories, you know what I mean? Because that whole year, first of all, it was the first time I had ever lived away from home. And I decided to go from Kentucky all the way to Maine. Don't ask, don't know.
So crazy.
Couldn't tell you, that's where I landed. And I was open when I was searching for programs. So I think it taught me, and I lived with a roommate my first, like, I don't know, 6 months that I was there. And then, I moved out like for like the second half of my year. Cause I was like, okay, like, feel good. I'm going to move cause I feel more confident. I'm going to try living on my own for a while, like see how that feels. And I've lived alone ever since, by the way. So I really think while it's not like a specific story, that year taught me so much about myself, and truly where I think I found my independence as a
Mm-hmm.
single female. Because I'm single. I don't have children. I have tons of friends that have kids and are married and whatnot, but I feel very comfortable living in like this single life solo space.
Mm-hmm.
Don't think that's as common as people think it is.
Mm-hmm.
I've listened to a lot of podcasts and read a lot of books about, living the solo life, traveling solo, and how to be safe about it. And if I hadn't had the experience that I had with AmeriCorps, I would never be in this boat.
That's so cool. That's a really strong reflection. It gives you that independence. For me, it gave me confidence. That's the one thing that I can definitely say is like, it gave me my confidence in the ability to figure out how to get things done. I know it's cliche, and I think I say that every single podcast, but it's true. It's a great slogan. That's why it hasn't changed, because that's essentially what we're doing. And so, you mentioning that AmeriCorps gave you the confidence to be independent, like that's so powerful. So something like I had mentioned at the beginning, there's a million of us who have gone through the service year. I'll double check and fact check about the astronaut, and I'll make sure I get that right. And hopefully it is correct, and then we'll get their name and we'll get them on. But so I think we've all had, everyone that's gone through AmeriCorps has had a similar but different experience, but we've all gone through national service. We've had ups and downs, we've made friends, we've, made enemies, we've discovered things that we definitely don't want, and learned to be able to thrive in environments, hard, whatever. So I really think just the way that things are kind of going right now across our country, where people are just not really even engaging or talking to anybody, we have that shared experience, but we may have different views, different vocations, living in different areas. I'm assuming that's the Colorado Rockies behind you. Is that what we're looking at? Yeah. If I had this screen off, it would be like my wall, and I'm in Maryland. And so, very different landscape. But what would you like kind of hope for, where these conversations can go, and where this community of AmeriCorps alums could come together, a bridge or a message or something that maybe you could think that we could bring this forward?
I think I always joke because in Louisville, if you meet someone else from Louisville, you ask them two questions. Where did you go to high school? And depending on the answer to that question, depends on if you ask them the second question, which is, are you a Louisville or are you a Kentucky fan?
Uh-huh.
And depending on that answer is whether or not you continue conversing or you like go your separate ways. Like, it's nice to meet you. Have a good life. I think a similar thing applies when you say, oh, you're an AmeriCorps alum. Tell me more about your service year. It immediately opens so many doors, because you already have that one thing in common. And then what happens is, like, because again, same thing, there's only a million of us, whether or not that's a lot, but it's also a very small community. There is going to be like, you are ingrained and connected, whether you like it or not. And it can open so many doors for you. Whether it's helping a college student figure out, oh, I don't know what I want to do with my life, but I have a really, like, you can say, well, I met this AmeriCorps alum, and like, they're doing XYZ, like, would you be interested in learning about what that means and what that is? Or whether it's like a volunteer that you come across, it doesn't matter. Like the connections, I think that we innately have, especially with the tools that we have nowadays. Like, how do we even connect with each other before like LinkedIn? Like,
No.
You know what I mean? So like, utilizing the tools that we have, which is for me, like that LinkedIn group is, I see posts there frequently of like, here's a job opportunity.
Yes.
Here's this happening. Here's this happening. But also just being like open to conversation. It doesn't mean that like you and I, so like we're recording this podcast right now, we might not speak again for another 6 months, but it doesn't mean that like, Nikki, I'm not going to come to you in 3 months and be like, hey, it's been a while. How's life? How's it going? like, and we're forever connected, and we might not, we're not going to talk on a weekly basis, but we have a network together now. And so if you come across somebody that's like, I really want to get into nonprofit work and I hate fundraising, you're going to flag and be like, well, Brittany is doing work that isn't fundraising.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And like,
Mm-hmm.
I think as long as we're open to connection, regardless of what it is, and I never need, like, anytime someone reaches out to me on LinkedIn, I'm always like, how can I help you? How can I support you? Keeping that as an open door, because you have no idea when someone's going to reach out and be like, hey, like we connected 2 years ago, but I remember this and this and this when we met, like, can you help me? I mean, that stuff happens all the time. And so
Yeah.
like, just being open to making a connection, and whether it's a podcast or just a simple conversation, like, just do it. Because I don't
love
think
that.
you're going to regret it.
Yeah. And something that you and I chatted about, and we didn't bring it up, but I'm bringing it up now, is networking at a different level, right? Like, that's kind of what this is, because now, I am sure you have plenty of contacts in Maryland, but now you have another contact that has a lot of contacts, and now I know somebody in Colorado who, just the other day for my job, I was working with a student who was graduating in May, and she wants to move back out to Seattle. Well, I have a national network of commissioners that I worked with who are executive directors. So I reached out to the executive director of the Washington Commission, and I was like, hey, there's a student who's blah, blah, blah. Could you like maybe have a conversation with her, and here's her resume? Like, if we continue having these conversations, we're gonna be able to go to any state or probably city and be like, oh, Brittany's here. Yesterday, I was talking to Kate Morton. She's down in Albuquerque, New Mexico, like Peter from, I think he was in Philadelphia. So I love that idea. Just stay open and have conversations and just do it and start networking at a different level.
Yeah. That's elevated networking at its finest right there.
Elevated networking. Yep. Well, this was awesome, Brittany. I know it's like the middle of your workday, so I really appreciate you like just stepping out and doing this. Any last words or anything that you want to leave the folks with?
We live in a very different world nowadays, and there's a lot of, conversations about work-life balance and do this and don't do that. And there's a lot of guidance. There's a lot of people doing a lot of different things, whether it's career or, they're joining protests or running for mayor. Like, I don't know, I'm making stuff up. The biggest thing that the biggest piece of advice that I have as we continue to go through a little and a lot of chaos, be kind. That's it. Be kind.
That's great. That's a perfect way to end.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all for listening. And we'll have another one of these coming up shortly when I can wrangle another AmeriCorps alum in here with me. So thanks so much.
Thanks, Nikki.